The markets are so confusing nowadays, up and down and all around. We're waiting to see what the Fed's going to end up doing. Can anyone really make sense of it all? My next guest certainly does in his new book, Dinosaur, Derivatives, and Other Trades, a study in financial fantasy, enigma, and philosophy. Jeremy Jose now joins us, who spent over 20 years, in fact, working at some of the leading financial institutions like Citigroup and N.M. Rothschild. Jeremy, great to have you here.
Hey, Michael. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Yeah, I'm guessing most people have no idea what a derivative even is. When you say dinosaur derivatives, what are you really talking about?
Well, look, I mean, the book's not really about dinosaurs or derivatives, and it's just really a metaphor. But what the book is about is I mean, I studied, before I went into finance, I studied a lot of philosophy and a lot of economics, both as an undergraduate in the UK, you can hear from accent, and then as a graduate. And the book really just tries to put some slightly wacky stories around certain concepts in finance, including the ideas of financial instruments, the ideas of value, the ideas of money, the ideas of ownership. And, you know, part of that gets into derivatives. So the title's a bit misleading. It's just a sort of funny metaphor. But the book tries to give a picture of a slightly wacky picture of finance.
The derivatives, that's what led us to that financial crash in 2008, right?
Right. Because, you know, one of the things the book tries to talk about is the nature of financial innovation. And, you know, there's no doubt that part of what happened in the crash in 2008 was a lot of financial innovation. And the strange thing about financial innovation is that we do actually need it, right? It's actually needed in our finance system, but it's not really testable, right? I mean, when you develop a drug or a car, these things can all be tested before they're put out into the market. But derivatives, for example, can't really be tested until they're all imposed upon us.
So they're just experimenting with our economic stability?
Well, that's sort of right. I mean, there isn't such a thing as a social laboratory. So we are all the guinea pigs for new derivative products, for all sorts of new financial products. And funny things often happen before we really find out how they work, and the credit crisis was partly a result of that.
So in reading your book, does someone walk away feeling better or worse about our financial system?
You know, I try to strike a balance. I mean, one of the things I say right in the acknowledgement of the book is that, you know, the financiers suffer from these existential crises where they sort of ask themselves, what's the point of this all? And there's a certain finality in it all. But at the same time, finance is fundamental to our system. And, you know, when it goes wrong, like we saw in the crisis, it's the blood and the brains of our system, and everything goes wrong. Okay, so I try to strike a balance. In
the work you did, there were several decades working in the financial world. Does it amount to people basically just trying to make money? Is that all you see, or is there more to it?
No, I think there's much more to it. I think most, you know, banks, most finance people are sensible professionals trying to run the banking system. But unfortunately, you know, money has a tendency to cause these aberrations. It can cause bad behavior, and we're all susceptible to that. It can cause venality, and it can cause these bubbles, and these things are sort of inevitable.
Are we in one right now, then? Or?
Well, I think, you know, there has been a huge run-up in the equity market since the crisis. I don't know whether the whole equity market's inflated. I do think that social media stocks are completely inflated, and I think we're into a sort of new little Internet 2 bubble, yeah.
No kidding. You talk about regulatory failure. How do you address that in the book?
Well, again, I try to address it with some balance, where I say, you know, for all the reasons we just touched on, in terms of venality, in terms of bubbles, markets do need to be regulated, but there needs also to be these constraints on regulation. I think what's happened actually in the U.S. system today is we've got regulatory micromanagement and regulatory mania.
And what has that led to, then?
Well, at a certain point, it actually constrains the flow of credit and the flow of capital in the system to, you know, mid-market businesses that actually need the capital. And generally, it can constrain growth.
Really, the regulations...
it doesn't even necessarily maximize justice. So, again, you need a balance in the regulation.
How does regulation do that, though, keep the money from flowing out?
Well, for example, today many of the banks, many of the depository institutions out there were put into a position of such constraint that they're actually not lending in the way that they need to be lending. They will lend to very high quality credits. They will lend to the best customers in terms of getting a mortgage, but your average Joe can find it quite hard to get a mortgage. A lot of perfectly decent credit-worthy mid-market companies can find it hard to get the financing they need.
Too many rules, though. Does that come from that real estate crash we saw, though?
It does, and it's a natural reaction given how far out of control things went. And it's not so much too many rules. I think it's just the wrong type of rules. The rules become micromanaging. I mean, just to give you one statistic, the Glass-Steagall Act, which was the old act after the Wall Street crash, was about 35 pages long. The Dodd-Frank Act is about 850 pages long. So it's just the wrong type of rules.
You also talk about, by the way, I'm talking to Jeremy Jose, his new book, Dinosaur, Derivatives and Other Trades. In what capacity did you work in these financial firms?
Oh, I was, and look, I continue to work in the finance industry. I've basically been an investment banker myself, most of my career, and I specialized in actually restructuring, buying, selling, recapitalizing other banks. Okay. So, the banking sector has always been the core of what I've done. And
we hear about this too big to fail and how that hasn't changed. What's the state of our banking system now, would you say?
I think that's true. I mean, I think certainly the big money center, the banks are too big to fail. And one of the things they've tried to do under Dodd-Frank is create what these call these resolution plans, these living wills, where these big banks have got to put in place a way of resolving themselves without relying on government the next time there's trouble. But, I'm pretty confident that these plans will just never work in practice. And the day there is trouble again, they'll have to throw them in the garbage can, and government will be relied on.
Again, is that something we could face rather soon?
Look, at the moment, the U.S. economy has hugely improved, and actually the banking system's in very good health. I think last year out of 6,000 banks, only 14 failed, which is one of the lowest for about sort of 50 years. So I don't see a new banking crisis coming anytime soon. But there will be other crises. I mean, I will stake my life on it. The booms and busts have not gone away.
You're saying these social media stocks are the first ones to go, you think?
I think at the moment, there's no way you can, on any rational basis, justify the valuations of firms like Twitter, Facebook, Uber. I mean, these stocks are trading at multiples that imply huge growth in these businesses, which is just not credible.
You also talk about white-collar psychopaths. What's that about?
Right. So, look, I also, as I said, the book tells lots of these funny, curious stories, and I also tell a story about a fraudster who I dealt with on one of my transactions. And, this is getting, you were asking before, what are most finance people like? I think most of them are okay. Most of them they're just normal human beings. But I really strongly believe, and this has been my experience, there are these few guys who are just sort of on the thin end of the normal distribution in terms of morality and are very, very different from the rest of us. And these guys can be very dangerous, and these are the sort of white-collar psychopaths that I'm talking about.
Do they tend to do well in the financial world?
Well, what I think happens is that they can continue running their schemes for a long time, and they often appear alluring to people. I mean, think of the Gordon Gekko type figure. They appear alluring to people, but usually they come unstuck eventually. But partly it comes back to regulation again. If the regulatory system isn't functioning, these people can go on for many years until they're eventually caught.
Gotcha. And can you recognize them when you deal with them directly?
Well, I think that's the most interesting question, because I think at first you don't recognize them. I mean, the one guy who I write about, and it's based on a true story, and obviously we don't go into names, but none of us did recognize what he was like at first. And it took a long time until people realized, what this guy was and how much damage he was doing.
Right. That pyramid scheme, I can't remember the guy's name. It should come to me instantly, but I know he's serving a long prison term now.
Well, yeah, I think you're thinking of Bernie Madoff.
Yeah, indeed, yeah, Bernie Madoff. And he fooled everyone, right?
Right, and interestingly, what he started by just dipping into his client accounts. And, actually that happens to a number of fund managers, and you're not allowed to do it, but but some of them do it by accident. But usually, your average fund manager who does it, they're a bit short of working capital and they get desperate. But usually, they sort of give up after about a year or two. The difference with a Bernie Madoff is that he industrialized the whole process. And these are the sort of characters I'm talking about who are quite rare out there.
Right. You never bumped into Bernie Madoff yourself, did you?
I didn't know. I do know some of the guys who put money with him, but no, I don't know him.
They were just completely shocked then. No sense that there was anything there.
Most of them. I think some of them may have turned a blind eye. But, I'd say most of them weren't fundamentally bad guys, but they're human beings, and we're all very vulnerable when it comes to money.
Well, it's a complicated system also. Jeremy Jose, the new book, Dinosaur Derivatives and Other Trades, a study in financial fantasy, enigma, and philosophy. Jeremy, thank you.
Thank you very much.